questions that that has been raised a lot since October 7th is, what did Hamas expect to happen, right? I mean, they come into Israel, they conduct a one-day Holocaust, they invaded, they seized temporarily several of the communities along the border with Gaza, and they committed atrocities that nobody ever imagined that we'd ever see in our lifetimes, really ever. And what was the goal? Like did they think that they were going to conquer Israel on October 7th? Did they think that they were going to overrun Israel? And there's speculation that they maybe got distracted by the young people at the Nova Festival, and that they were supposed to move on to Dimona or to other strategic sites in Israel, and that they just got delayed because they were having so much fun with their orgy of hatred and sadism in the kibbutzim and at the Nova Music Festival that they just forgot where they were going. But it's hard to imagine that Yahya Sinwar and these other mass murderers thought that they were going to conquer Israel that day. More likely, they assessed that they would demoralize the people of Israel and make us all believe that we were going to be eradicated and that we would just surrender or lose faith and run away from the home of our forefathers, from our historic homeland, and that they thought that they were going to inspire the entire Islamic world, all the mujahideen of the Muslim world throughout the Middle East, who rise up as one in jihad and march on Jerusalem. So that they thought that on the one hand, they would demoralize the Jews, and on the other hand, that they would energize the Islamic world, the Arab world in the Middle East, and that their fight, their annihilationist war against the Jews would be joined by the Egyptians, by the Jordanians, by all of the nations of the Middle East. And so what was interesting was, first of all, they didn't understand the Jews, because when we saw what happened to our brothers and sisters, we united as one to eradicate Hamas. And we saw this at every turn. We saw it obviously with our young men and women who rose up and ran into the flames of war. We had 130% call-up rate, so 100% of the people who were called up in emergency orders for the IDF, plus another 30% above and beyond that, who said, take me too. And if you guys were at all involved with trying to send military supplies to Israel, vests and other things, it was because the army didn't have enough supplies for 130% of the reservists. They may have, on a good day, had enough for 100, but then, they were caught with so many people who wanted to go into the fight. So that was our young people. And then just the level of volunteerism among Israeli civilians to aid in the war effort, whether it's, these Jewish moms who are going to all of the mustering sites and bringing food and food and food and food to our men, or the Jewish community and Christians as well in the United States and in other countries that were just donating millions of dollars of equipment and airlifting it over to Israel to get it in time for our men going into Gaza. Whatever it happened to be, we just saw that far from breaking our will, it steeled us to the fight ahead and unified us as a people in understanding that the war for national survival had just been renewed, that maybe we thought that we were in a place where we could bicker among ourselves and fight over various aspects of governance in Israel, but no, in fact, we were wrong. And what we have here is an enemy that is truly bent on annihilating us, like they did on October 7th, and that we have to destroy them. And then when we're done, we can go back to fighting one another as much as we want. But so they totally misjudged the Jews. And they also misjudged the Arabs, which is interesting, because it's true that Israel is fighting a seven-front war. We're fighting in Gaza, we're fighting in Lebanon, we're fighting the Houthis in the south, we're fighting the Iranian militia in Iraq and in Syria, and we're fighting Iran itself. And so we do have this massive war that we're fighting, but the people that we're fighting are not the Muslim world as a whole, there are Iran and its proxies in all of these lands. And the truth is that unlike what Hamas thought, that we were going to be invaded from the north by Hezbollah with their ground forces inside of northern Israel, and that perhaps the Mujahideen in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt would join from ISIS, from Al-Qaeda, and wherever else, they didn't join. And the Jordanians didn't overthrow King Abdullah and march on Israel from the Eastern Front. And so they do have these Iranian proxies that are working with them, and Iran is absolutely behind everything that we're seeing on the ground. But we weren't invaded in the way that they seemingly anticipated we would be. So that's interesting. But the surprise that we discovered was that while the Jews were not broken, we were steeled, and the Mujahideen, the Islamic holy warriors, so-called, didn't march as one on Jerusalem to annihilate the Jews as Hamas seemingly expected. It was in the West that you had the greatest enthusiasm for what they did. The attacks against Jews and Israel on college campuses didn't start when Israel began our counteroffensive in Gaza. They started on October 7th while Jews were being incinerated and raped and tortured and kidnapped. Harvard had a declaration that was signed by 30-plus student organizations standing with Hamas and blaming Israel for the annihilation that was going on in Israeli communities on October 7th. It was drafted and put out already on October 8th. So that this wasn't in response to anything that Israel had done. All Israel was doing was get killed while they were writing this declaration that was signed on by over 30 student organizations. The same thing at Columbia, they were attacking Israel on October 7th. So that and that was then joined by this bloodlust of Jew hatred, calls to support Hamas and to join Hamas in its goal of annihilating the Jews. This was in the West where it was most profound. And we're looking at this in North America, we're looking at this in Europe, we're looking at this in Australia, so that the enthusiastic response that greeted the Hamas invaders was the most enthusiastic in what we call the free world, in the West. And that, I think, was a huge shock. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he talks about it, he talks about that the lava of Jew hatred that had been dormant since the Holocaust has just been exploding all over the Western world. And I think that was an apt description if you think about the flames that are literally rising throughout the Western world. And, it's part of this is Islamist, right? You've had mass Muslim immigration, particularly to Europe, since 2015, and also previous to 2015, already you had 10% of the population of France was Muslim, but also in the United States. So I just want to read you an excerpt from a speech that a man named Mohammed Siblani, who is the editor-in-chief of an Arab newspaper called Arab News that comes out in Michigan, gave at the Islamic Center in Dearborn, Michigan, just this month on May 10th. And what he said in this speech, and it was very important, he said, 40 years ago, we had a mayor in Dearborn, the Islamic Center is in Dearborn, Michigan. He said, 40 years ago, we had a mayor who talked about the Arab problem. Guess what? The Arabs are ruling Dearborn Heights, and Hamtramck. And then he went on and exultantly proclaimed that it isn't just the present that they're celebrating, but looking towards the future. And he said, I can be very confident to tell you that we are on the road to the White House, to Congress, to decision-making everywhere in the United States. So what we've seen is that the Islamist triumphalism that is marked in the bloodlust that you're seeing against Jewish students and faculties on campuses from coast to coast in this country, that you're seeing in Trafalgar Square in weekly anti-Semitic demonstrations in London and in cities around Europe and in Sydney, Australia, and in New Zealand, and countries really that nobody ever expected that these kinds of things could happen. So the Islamist triumphalism is really quite profound. And not only the triumphalism, but the sense of forward motion, that they're actually successfully seizing the reins of power throughout the Western world. And they're doing it not while they're hiding their aspirations to domination. They're doing it as they proudly declare them. They're not hiding anything. It's out in the open from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. We are going to kill all the Jews. Death to Israel, death to America is what they're chanting on college campuses all over the world. And they're doing it without fear. They're doing it with a sense that their time has come. They have nothing to hide. And that, to me, is amazing. And they feel that way, I believe, because they don't stand alone. They're not standing alone. They stand with a very, very politically powerful partner in the progressive, the cultural Marxist, the communist bloc on the left that may not share their ideal of a jihadist society where women are chattel, where Jews are dead, and where young boys go off to be a mujahideen at the age of 9. That's not necessarily the goal that people have in mind when they embrace progressive dogma. But one thing that's very fundamental that they both share is a hatred of the United States, is a hatred of the West, is a hatred of the Jews, and in the desire to see the free world brought to its knees, and a view that there's something inherently wrong and evil about American greatness, about American power, and of course about America's religious faith. And that common view, that common hatred of the bedrock of American society, of the bedrock of Western civilization, is what propels this, what's called a red-green alliance of the cultural Marxism, communism, progressives on the red side, and the Islamists, the jihadists on the green side, to move forward together. And the first goal that they have in mind, just like Hamas, just like Iran, is to single out the Jews. Jews in America, Jews in Europe, Jews in Australia, and of course, the Jewish state of Israel and all the Jews who live in Israel. They're the first. We're the first goal. Why? Because the Jews. Because we are a unique people. We're small people. We're easy to identify. It's easy to develop and propagate conspiracy theories, blaming all of the problems of the world on this small group that doesn't have the capacity to, or the bandwidth, to dispel the theories that are being spewed against us as quickly as they're being propagated. So that you can go after the Jews, you can develop conspiracy theories that Jews are responsible for all the ills in the world. And the thing is that it works. Professor Ruth Weiss, who is a professor of Yiddish literature, I think she's retired at Harvard University. She's an old friend of mine, and she explained to me, and she's explained in her books, that the thing about anti-Semitism that people don't understand is that it's an extraordinary tool for political mobilization. Because if you have all kinds of problems in your society, immigration, inflation, unemployment, you name it, it's much easier to blame it on an easily identified and isolated group of people than it is to solve. And so if you want to try to get people to believe in you without actually having to do anything to help them, then the way that you do it is you blame all the ills of a society on this easily identifiable, easily isolated group of people, and you say it's their fault. They're responsible for everything bad that has happened to you, that has happened to your community, your family, your country. And if you just get rid of these people, just push them out of the classroom, push them out of the faculty, push them out of the corporate boardroom, push them out of the Hollywood studios, push them out of the media, push them out of Wall Street, push them out of everything, and all the problems will go away. Presto, abracadabra, there are no Jews, there are no problems. This is how Hitler came to power. This is how he mobilized the German people on behalf of this idea of genocide. This is how the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and the other, and so many other regimes throughout the Arab world are able to excuse their failure to deliver basic goods to their people, because if everything is the responsibility of the Jews, then they don't have to do anything except blame the Jews more, kill more Jews, attack more Jews. And it works everywhere, and it works really, really well. So that when you're sick and tired of your society, or you're sick and tired of the hard work of dealing with Social Security that has been bankrupt for 3 generations, right? And it's just this empty, what was it? Do you guys remember back in the 2000 elections with the lockbox? I'm gonna put it in a lockbox. I haven't been following, I think that was like the first time that I noticed the debate on Social Security. And nobody's ever solved anything. But now, if you want to say the problem is the banks are controlled by the Jews, and the Jews are bad, get rid of the Jews, and then Social Security will be solvent, right? Then you've solved the problem of Social Security. Now, obviously, the issue of the Jews and blaming the Jews is also a good way to get rid of democracy. Because if you normalize the concept of dehumanizing a sector of a society, then you're already normalizing the concept that you don't have one man, one vote anymore, right? That if the Jews are a problem that has to be dealt with by things like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, by the BDS movement, if you've heard of it, to blame everything on the Jews in America, Jews who support Israel, Jews who this, Jews who that, then what you're doing is disenfranchising Jews. You're saying AIPAC is a foreign agent. You're not allowed to go to the US Congress and petition the elected leaders on behalf of Israel, because if you do that, you have dual loyalty, and you're not allowed to do that. What you're saying is American Jews aren't allowed to participate in American politics. You can be pro-gun without trying to overthrow the government. You can be pro-abortion without trying to destroy the edifice of the United States, or being accused of being a foreign agent. But if you're a Jewish person in the United States and a citizen of this country, and you support AIPAC, you support Israel, you want to go and petition Congress on behalf of Israel, you want to take people out of Congress who are anti-Israel, then you're suddenly a foreign agent. Why? Because you're Jewish. Why? Because there's something inherently wrong with Jewish participation of Jewish Americans in American politics. So you see how it works. And then the minute that you've done that, well, you've gotten rid of all of democracy. Because if the principle of democracy is one man, one vote, and everybody has an equal right to participate in the political game, and the winner wins, the people who get 50 plus 1 vote on behalf of their view are the ones who get to hold the day. So if you've just taken that away from one group that's easily identified, easily isolated, easily denied the rights that everybody else gets, then you've primed the pump. You've paved the way for the disfranchisement of the entire society. So too, the isolation of Israel in the international community, what is it doing? Today, I flew in yesterday morning, last Sunday night, I flew in from Israel. And I landed at Newark Airport at 6 o'clock in the morning. And like when you're in an international flight or any flight, right, you don't get your messages, you're not updated on the news. And if you're somebody like me who's always tuned into what's going on, it's a little bit weird. And then my phone finally goes on when we are in the United States, and I look and I see that while I was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. The International Criminal Court decided that indeed they're going to be issuing arrest warrants against our prime minister and against our defense minister for fake crimes that they didn't commit, that Israel is not committing. It's a blood libel. And I want to get into this a little bit, but the first thing I'm going to say is the end, which is, what is this about? It's not just about Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. It's not even just about the IDF or the state of Israel. If they get away with denying Israel the right to self-defense when we're surrounded by genocidal, literally, openly, obviously proved genocidal enemies who are actively engaged in advancing the cause of the annihilation of the Jewish people, even as we speak, then if they say that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself, not only are they committing a war crime by aiding and abetting, providing material support for a genocide, they are also readying the ground for doing this against other countries, and particularly the United States of America, because what they're saying is, we believe that, because they're an institution, the International Criminal Court, they're an organization. And who of you is in an organization? Any organization, I would guess all of you, right? You have some organizational affiliation, right? Your church or whatever group. Every organization inherently wants to have influence, and they want to get bigger. If you're a church, you want more members, right? You want more money to do things together as a church. Same thing with any organization, the UN, the ICC, whatever. The Screenwriters Association, whatever it is, every organization wants more power. So they believe that the way to make the International Criminal Court powerful enough to go after, say, America, is by going after the Jew. Because if they go after the Jewish state, if they criminalize us, if they say that our just war is unjust, our legal war is illegal, our duly elected democratic leaders who are the repository of the people's will when they go forth and fight to victory in this war for our national survival, if they're war criminals, right, then that means, and if they get away with this, then who gets more powerful? They've just made a leap into the absurd and they get away with it, they become more powerful. They become much more powerful. If they're not destroyed by going after the Jews, then they're gonna win. And if they win, they get bigger. And as they get bigger, they look towards larger targets. So next time, maybe it'll be the UK or France or some other, or India, maybe. Or maybe it'll just already go after the United States of America. They already tried. They opened up 2 investigations against US forces from Afghanistan, and the way that Donald Trump killed it in 2018 is he issued an executive order, said, you go forward with this, one more baby step, and we're slapping personal sanctions on every member of the ICC. You're not gonna bank, we're gonna freeze all of your assets. Yeah. And we're gonna deny you and your families visas to enter the United States. And if you're here, we're gonna revoke your visas and you're out of here on the first plane out. And what did Joe Biden do when he came into office? He revoked the executive order. And so here we are now, where this same ICC is going, oh, and by the way, Donald Trump's executive order also applied to US allies, including Israel, so that it would have protected Israel from what's happening now, but it was gone. So now Congress, both houses, are pushing forward with this, with their bills. Senator Cotton and Congressman Roy and Stefanik and others are moving forward with bills this week to legislate the same content that was in Donald Trump's executive order. We'll have to see what happens with the administration, if Biden will veto it, or if he'll get a waiver and then he won't issue the sanctions, et cetera, et cetera. We'll have to see how any of this pans out. But the point is that if Biden allows this to go through, and there is a likelihood that he will, then they're gonna come after the US military again. Like, they already showed their card. They already said, they tipped their hat, we're gonna come after America. And this empowers them, because it always starts with the Jews, because we're alone. But it never ends with the Jews, because the minute that you've successfully targeted the Jews, you can go on to bigger and better targets. Bigger targets, more powerful targets, more connected targets, wealthier targets. You can go after the Christians. You can go after America. So that it's always so easy to separate it out, you know? Oh, it's just the Jews, and anyway, they did this, and we don't like them, and they didn't vote Republican, and they didn't do this, and they didn't do that, and we're mad at them, and they're blah, blah, blah. So you start with the Jews, and people never, and so it's easy to kind of cut that off and say, oh, it's just them. But it's never, ever just the Jews. It always starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, but 60 million people were killed in World War II, right? And when you put that in perspective, and it happens every time that the Jews are persecuted everywhere in the world throughout human history, it's a pivot moment towards tyranny against everybody. So I think, you know, that's one of the things that we're looking at. And then we ask ourselves, why is it that the progressives are standing with people like Siblani, who's talking about the Islamic takeover of America? You know, why do you have things like, you know, Queers for Palestine and all of these other groups that are targeted specifically and directly by Islamic supremacists? Why do you have them standing with them? Because what you found is that as people like Siblani and others have made their inroads into the United States, seized control over municipalities, over the Muslim communities in all of the major cities, the mosques, and then forward giving billions of dollars to US educational institutions and other key institutions of the United States, you've had on a parallel track, right, and I'm sure you guys have heard all about it, the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical race theory mantras being marched through the institutions of this country that have been telling young Americans, and not beginning on October 7th, but going back decades, that the United States was born in the sin of slavery, that the United States is evil, that the United States' original sin can never be expiated. It doesn't matter what America does unless America, as in the immortal words of Barack Obama, is fundamentally transformed. And the fundamental transformation of America, as you see, is the fundamental transformation of the mindset of the American people to believe that there's something wrong with their country, and to believe that humanity is divided between the privileged and the dispossessed, and that the privileged are inherently evil, and whoever they classify as underprivileged or as dispossessed or as weak is inherently good, and these are immutable designations that can never be changed. So that they have this pecking order that they've determined outside with no voter input, with nobody making these decisions except a bunch of anti-American professors. And they come in and they say, Jewish people, immutably bad. Israel, no right to exist. United States, born in sin, cannot be expiated, except by stopping to be the United States of America, and on and on and on through the pecking order, on and on through the ladder of dispossession and privilege that's dictated from outside and can never be reversed and can never be changed. And they teach us to children in this country, starting from the age of preschool. And of course, everything else that you think is immutable, like sex, is suddenly whatever you want. Right? And so it's destroying reality, saying objective reality is racist. You cannot look at people and take a gauge of their character. You have to look at what they look like and determine and dictate to them what their character is. And as absurd and as crazy as all of this sounds, it's working. It's working. When you look on the college campuses, what we found since October 7th in particular is how many people ascribe to this worldview and how willing they are, just by pressing a button, to stand in the middle of their campuses next to people who would see them dead if they had their druthers and march with them hand in hand, calling for the annihilation of the Jewish state. It's extraordinary. It's amazing. When you think about it just from the outside, it's an amazing achievement. How did you do that? How did you turn all of these young minds from hives of activities into these lead boxes that you can't let any light into? How did you do that? That's incredible and horrible. Look what you just did to the youth of America. That's terrible, but it's quite the achievement. You have these young minds closed hermetically, and they're doing something that is antithetical to their basic interests as human beings, as Americans, as girls, as boys. And it's not just them that are so extraordinary, something else as well. So if we've been shocked by the extraordinarily large number, unexpected number of Americans, 20% of Americans stand with Hamas against Israel, 80% stand with Israel against Hamas, so we're glad for the 80%. 20% of Americans, that's a lot. That's a lot. 20% of Americans stand with a genocidal Islamic terrorist organization? That's huge. And the other thing is that among those 80%, you have to ask yourself, okay, but at the side of the people who are marching with Hamas is an even larger group of people who might not like Hamas, might not like Islamic imperialism, might actually like the United States, but they would rather do nothing in the face of this blight on their society than accept that they have to face the evil of the Iranian nexus of Iran and all of its terror proxies throughout the Middle East and increasingly in Latin America, and that they're willing to accept the rise of these forces. They'd rather do that than to fight them. And that's sort of the silent people on the sidelines that are watching it and won't say it's wrong, or say, okay, we see an attenuation between what's happening to Israel and what might happen to us. We don't see a link between them. We're willing to cast aspersions on the Jewish people in the diaspora and in the land of Israel and hope for the best, because we don't want to fight an endless war, because Iran never did anything to America except, kill thousands of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, take the US embassy hostage, declare war on the United States since 1979, et cetera, et cetera. Aside from that, nothing, right? We don't got no beef with the Iranians, right? Whatever. But they would rather ascribe to that view and say, Israel, with all due respect and with all sympathy to the victims of October 7th, it's not that you had it coming, but kind of did, or totally did, and because Jewish. And that's a large group too. That's a very large group. That's even larger than the group that's on the campuses screaming from the river to the sea. And then you're left with this other group of Americans who understand the dangers, who understand the gravity of the moment for the Jewish people, but also for humanity. And here, that's where it's so important that people like you exist, and that you're empowered, and that you understand that this is the time to make your voices heard, that this is the time to fight for God, fight for family, fight for country, and fight for what is right. And that means stand with Israel. Thank you. Thank you. Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel he said it back in 2015 when he came to the Joint Houses of Congress, and he spoke out against Obama's nuclear appeasement deal with the mullahs in Iran that was going to give them a nuclear weapon, and may actually have already accomplished that fact thanks to his buddy Joe. But Prime Minister Netanyahu came already to the United States at that point, and he said, Israel will stand alone if we have to, but Israel will stand. And we're standing ever since, and we're standing today. But he also said then, and he's also said now, what is also a fundamental truth, which is that while we're willing to stand alone, we know we're not standing alone. We're not standing alone. God is standing with us. God is standing with us. And the people who stand with God stand with us as well. So I want to thank you for standing with God. And I want to thank you for standing with the Jewish people in our country, the state of Israel. God bless all of you. Thank you very much.